So this is one of those servants that I really wish was just a lot better. Nikki's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just really hard to shine when you're on the same banner as Tai Gong, and just how incredibly good that dude is. And then you have Nikki over here, who is pretty solid, but isn't really standing out on her own. She's kind of almost like a lesser version of Tai Gong, but an AoE Buster servant instead, which is like not bad. Again, if you're like a worse version, quote unquote, and when I say worse version, you know, slap some quotes around that. But if you're a worse servant than someone who's already like one of the best servants in the game, that's not really bad. That'd be like saying that Nero Bride is just bad Castoria. It's like, well, when you're the worst version of like one of the best supports in the game, that's really not a bad moniker to carry. But again, you guys kind of see what I'm saying, that I really wish she was a lot better. Now, this is also for personal reasons, because Nikki is absolutely adorable and I would love to grail her to 100. And I probably will grail her to 100 if I can get my hands on her. But unfortunately, I already did a lot of summons and I did not end up getting Nikki, but I did get Tai Gong, which I don't know how to feel about that, because I really wanted Nikki despite how good Tai Gong was. So I don't know, I might have to jump back in the banner, although for some reason they're not limited. Like, they're coming out in like a very similar event to Merlin when he came out for the Solomon raids, but neither of them are limited, so it's just a really weird scenario to be in. So maybe I'll just wait for her to come to me, or maybe I'll scoop her up on like a 4-star ticket if they drop that on JP. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but in this video we're going to talk about how good she is and if you should actually go and pursue this servant, which, I mean, just the fact that she's on the same banner as Tai Gong, I mean, just makes it a really strong banner to summon on. But we're going to talk about her stats, skills, and all that good stuff in today's video. But if you have not already, what are you doing? Why have you not clicked the like button and subscribe to the channel? You know, I'm doing that FGO daily content grind, and every bit of support is greatly appreciated. If you want to support the channel in a free way, I am affiliated by all means with LD Emulator and Loot Cakes. Those links are down in the description down below, and those are, again, free ways to support the channel. Common questions for LD Emulator: no, FGO does not delete your account if you put it on an emulator. That's the only reason I like actually support LD Emulator, because I'm like, oh yeah, you can actually play on your computer and not get absolutely nuked as if you were playing like Bleach Brave Souls or something. Also down in the description down below is my Twitch link, where usually I stream every weekday, but your boy's on vacation, so I don't know how likely it is that I'm going to be streaming, at least during this week. But you know, normally on normal weekdays I do stream. So if you're starving for extra content, you just want that special one-on-one interaction, or I guess chat-on-one interaction, because it's not really one-on-one, but you get what I'm saying. If you want that special interaction, the Twitch is down in the description down below as well. You can also click that join button to become a channel member and get channel member exclusive content. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into this servant, and I mean that by every stretch of the imagination. We're diving right into this servant, starting off with her hits, where she is a Buster servant, so immediately the things that I want to see with this servant is very high NP gain and very solid arts cards. Because, spoiler alert, Nikki is not packing like a 50% crazy battery or anything, so we want to see really strong hits here. And while the hits on the cards aren't necessarily the greatest, her base stat, at least for NP gain, is really high at 0.86%, which means even if you're not critting on those arts cards, they will refund a decent bit of NP, but they will truly show their worth whenever they crit. And it also means the extra attack, which is a composite card that gens stars, NP, and does big boy damage, is also going to shine because it is very reliant on you having high NP gain and star gen values. And well, thankfully enough, at least her NP gain values are rather high. Her star gen leaves a little bit to be desired, but I mean, she's a Buster servant. If you're really worrying about like getting stars or something, just slap Merlin in the team. That pretty much takes care of all of your problems. Although Nikki herself does have something to kind of help out with that if we go to skill 1. Because one of the effects you see here on skill 1 is that she drops 10 stars every turn for 3 turns. So if you have somebody like Merlin already with his NP up and her first skill is up, you're generating like anywhere from 15 to 20 stars per turn, depending if you were able to get overcharge on Merlin, which I always do try to recommend people to do if you're going to use him. And so it kind of means that you can use like a 1 Merlin, 1 Koyenskaya type team comp, which I think is really strong. And again, it also helps her secure a decent bit of stars. Now, again, you do have to have Merlin to do that, and or your own Koyenskaya and then bring a friend Merlin, but it is still an option to do that. But that's not the only thing that this skill does. It also gives her a Guts that lasts for 3 turns and 1 instance of debuff immunity, which I am really frowning upon. Because this is not a bad skill when it comes to defense. I mean, Guts is very, very strong. It basically just like, I don't care if you have Pierce Invincibility, I don't care if you have a Sure Hit, because I'm just going to live the hit regardless, unless, you know, you remove my buffs, which is kind of a problem. But unless you remove my buffs, I'm going to absolutely live. And then I love debuff immunity on DPS servants because it makes them really strong in challenge quests, where bosses want to like debuff your attack or try to charm or stun you or just annoying things like that. But the fact that she only has one instance of debuff immunity, I really would have liked to just see that be flat 3 turns of debuff immunity. I think that would have been really strong for her. But for whatever reason, they were just like, nah, let's just give her the one instance, which I hate it when they do that. Because it's really good if you can use that to like nega stun, nega charm, something that would really impede your ability to function as a unit for that turn. But then sometimes it just feels like it gets kind of wasted if like the enemy's like, ah, here's a 10% lowering of your attack, and you're like, aha, I dodged that. And then the enemy's okay, like, oh, well, okay, well, you neg that, but how about this big charm that's coming right after that? And you're like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. I wish I had 3 turns of debuff immunity, but still a very solid defensive skill that also helps out with her star genning ability because she does really do want to get crits on those arts cards. Even though her NP gain is rather high on those, because she doesn't have like a big thicky battery, she's going to be very reliant on getting crits on those arts cards. So this does kind of help patch up some holes in her defenses and in her star genning ability. Just again, a few little criticisms with how the skill is built. The second skill is just pretty much generic good stuff. It's buffing her own arts and buster cards by 30% for 3 turns. That is just absolutely good. Spoiler alert, she has one of the more common things that they've been doing with like the last 2 years where they give the servant like a 30% buff to one of their card types, and then they give the other 20% on their NP. So on the turn that they fire their NP, they have a mana burst. So that way they can kind of get away with giving them a quote-unquote mana burst for 3 turns. But do keep in mind that that arts buff is also really good because not only is it just increasing the damage of her arts cards, it's actually buffing the NP gain of those arts cards as well. So you can almost treat this as like an NP gain skill because you're going to be refunding the majority of your NP from her arts cards, go figure, and then this is going to buff up those cards' ability to gen NP by 30%. And then she's also getting a 50% damage mod against dragon enemies for 3 turns, which again is really good. There's a decent chunk of dragon enemies, whether they be servants or just trash mobs. It's just kind of not as good as Tai Gong having this overlapping damage against divine and demonic enemies, and then being able to just obliterate divine enemies on his NP. So again, don't get me wrong, very strong offensive skill, just kind of hard to stomach when she's on the same banner as Tai Gong. Like, almost imagine if like Shen Gong was on the same banner as Merlin. You'd be like, they're both really good servants. It's just like Shen Gong's kind of getting overshadowed right now. Then finally we have her third skill, and man, I really wish this was a party-wide charge, because if you're going to only give her 20%, you might as well make it a party-wide charge, because the standard right now is to at least give a servant a 30% battery, so they can give themselves a false 50% battery with a 20% append skill. But they didn't even do that, and then they didn't even make it a party-wide charge, despite everything else on this third skill being party-wide. That being the 30% crit buff that she gives to the entire party for 3 turns, and the 30% damage mod against dragons for 3 turns. Those are both really good effects, and it just would have really made things complete if they just made it a 20% party-wide buff. But for whatever reason, they restricted it to only her, which is really going to also hinder her ability to perform well in the Koyenskaya meta. Now, if you have a maximum broken K scope, this ain't really a problem for you, because if you have a maximum broken scope, you can pretty much use any servant you want in the Koyenskaya meta, basically. And don't get me wrong, it's still a very strong skill. I mean, having the ability to get an additional bit of NP on top of her arts cards being really strong with the arts buff and the ability to kind of gen stars for herself makes her really consistent when it gets her NP, but it's just like, it just should have been party-wide with everything else on the skill. And if you're going to only make it 20% and not give her the 30%, which is the gold standard under the 50% battery, which is obviously the best of the 3, because I mean, they rarely give out like the 80% and higher batteries. I mean, that's obviously the ideal, is just give me 100% battery. But if you're going to restrict her, which is a 20% battery, you should have made it party-wide, because then you'd have like kind of like an Ozymandias type thing going on with this servant. But I mean, it does give her an 80% damage mod against dragons, which is really strong. Again, just kind of pales in comparison to her being on the same banner with Tai Gong, who has a 200% anti-divine niche. And it just kind of like doesn't let her shine as much, because overall her skills I think are all really fine. I just have the little gripe with the debuff immunity only being 1 instance, and then the NP not being a party-wide buff despite it being on a party skill, and it only being 20%. But aside from that, I think it's all pretty good stuff. And then even her NP is pretty solid. Like I was saying, the overcharge effect gives her at baseline a 20% buster buff that procs first for that turn, meaning that as long as you have her second skill up, you have a mana burst for that turn, which is really good. She pierces defense, again, that makes her really strong when it comes to challenge quests, as there are some really annoying bosses in the game that do like to stack defense a lot. It makes her really good for a lot of those fights. The burn is very negligible. I don't really care about the burn. And then reducing the enemy's defense by 20% for 3 turns does mean on a follow-up NP, she actually will continue to hit harder, which again is very good. Again, it's just like, she's kind of living in the shadow of Tai Gong right now. Because otherwise, I would say this is just a really solid, probably like A-tier gold rider. Like, just very, very strong. Nothing super broken, but she's just generally very useful. Like, she's just usable in a lot of teams. Not a whole lot of weird stuff going on with this rider. A few gripes here and there. But it's just because she's on the banner with Tai Gong, who literally is kind of like doing the same thing as like being a support that does really good damage against specific damage mods. It just kind of makes it hard to really appreciate how good she is. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I'm a little torn on this servant. I'm thinking about jumping back into the banner because I do want to grail her, as I said before. But we'll see about that. Maybe you'll see a future summoning video drop on the channel where we're trying to go for Nikki or something. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late, guys.